To nationalise Clyde Port to bring the ports and harbours on the River Clyde into public ownership. This has been lodged by Robert Birds on behalf of the Campaign to Save Inchgreen Dry Dock. It calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to use powers under the Harbours Act 1964 and the Marine Navigation Act 2013 to revoke the Peel Ports Group Clyde Port Operation Limited's status as the harbour authority for the River Clyde and its estuary, to establish a municipal port authority in Clyde Port's place and bring the strategic network of ports and harbours along the River Clyde into public ownership, and the compulsory purchase Inchgreen Dry Dock for the benefit of the Inverclyde community. In background to this petition, the petitioner raises concerns about ships breaking away from the moorings at Clyde Port managed ports and the future of the Inchgreen Dry Dock at Greenock. Our Spice briefing notes that the Harbours Act 1964 allows Scottish ministers to make an order relieving the Harbour Authority of its statutory powers, but only if the Harbour Authority applies for the order or consents to it being made, or if ministers have consulted with the authority and are satisfied it is unlikely to object. In responding to the petition, the Scottish Government notes that Scottish ports operate in a commercial environment, usually with no direct public funding. The response goes on to argue that the activities Clyde Port facilitates, the employment which it provides for, and the investment made in recent years are of significant importance to the Scottish economy. The Scottish Government states that it has no plans to explore compulsorily purchasing, revoking the powers of, or nationalising Clyde Port. The petitioner has also provided a submission with further details on the campaign's concerns surrounding the regeneration of Inchgreen Dry Dock, as well as concerns about the delays to our Ardrossan Harbour project. Now, our MSP colleague Katie Clark had hoped to join us for the consideration of this petition, but is unfortunately unable to do so. She has, however, provided a written submission which details various concerns raised by her constituents about Clyde Port's management of ports and harbours along the Ayrshire coast. However, staying with us from the concessionary petition we've just heard, we have Paul Sweeney MSP, who has an interest in this petition. And so before we have a think about it as a committee and consider comments or options, I'll invite Mr Sweeney to contribute first.
Well, thanks, Convener. And this is a petition that I have an interest in personally. I have a background in the shipbuilding industry in the Clyde, working for BE Systems. And I've maintained a long-standing interest in the development of the Clyde corridor as an industrial asset for the wider city region. And I have had long-standing concerns about its general long-term decline as a major port. And that really stems from ambitious plans that were launched around 20 years ago to develop Hunterston and Greenock as one of the major transatlantic transshipment terminals for containers coming across the Atlantic. And at that time, there was a huge investment planned in that respect. And then Clyde Port PLC merged with, or was purchased by Peel Group, which also owns the Mersey Docks and Harbour Company and has a major interest in the Mersey. So another competing west coast of Britain port. And subsequently, huge investment on the order of billions of pounds have gone into developing the Liverpool 1 container terminal in Liverpool. And the focus very much of Peel Group's operations as a port authority have been into the Mersey at the expense of the Clyde. So I think there is a general concern, long-standing, that the Clyde is being in a pattern of managed decline and disinvestment over many years, and that the focus has been very much on the Mersey side, to the extent to which, if you want a pilotage on the River Clyde, you're calling the Mersey, a call centre in the Mersey to get access to the River Clyde. It seems to me the number of fronts unacceptable. And perhaps there are some parallels with the previous inquiries into the management of airports in Scotland, where there was an issue with the one company managing both Glasgow and Edinburgh airports having a conflict of interest in that regard. There has not really been any serious inquiry or study into this and the potential long-term economic effects on the west of Scotland and the greater Glasgow city regions. There is a container terminal in Greenock, of course, but it doesn't even feature in the top 10 British ports anymore. It's been in decline for a long time. At one time, it was the 5th biggest container port in the UK. It no longer appears on any of the top 100 ports in Europe, for example. So there is a major long-term concern. There's a high correlation with the level of freight traffic coming through ports and levels of economic growth. So I think there is a yoke on the west of Scotland's potential. We've seen recently the publication of statistics on population that the west of Scotland is in long-term decline. There is a broader issue here that the government really needs to pay more attention to. We need to have a serious ports policy and a policy for growing freight traffic through Scotland, ship movements, and also the associated industries such as ship repair. And to that end, I think the petitioner makes some serious and valid points. I think we should be guided by measurable outputs. What is the goal to grow the Clyde? What is the goal to develop and invest in the Clyde and its operations? That is not clear at this point in time. There have been stop-start projects associated with the Inchgreen Dry Dock, which is the biggest mainland dry dock in Great Britain. Contrast that with Belfast, where we're seeing massive investment in the former Hall and Wool shipyard site. Nothing corresponding happening on the Clyde. So a number of fronts I have concerns. And even in a more parochial sense, the Upper Clyde effectively isn't dredged anymore beyond the Govan shipyard site and at Braehead, where the King George V dock sits. And that is a major concern because there's a real dearth of recreational traffic on the Upper Clyde. I think if anyone is familiar with the Clyde side around Glasgow, there aren't many boats going along, in contrast to somewhere like Merseyside, where it's teeming with marinas, wharfage, and lots of recreational craft. If Glasgow, for example, had a marina at the Pacific Quay, it would be a huge boon for the city and generate millions of pounds of revenue. There isn't any attention being applied to this. And it is quite extraordinary, in my view, that a private bill was passed in the early 1990s that effectively gave quasi-legislative control to a private enterprise to effectively manage 450 square miles of riverine land in the west of Scotland, with huge legal privileges and bylaws, including the management of the riverbed itself. So the obligations they have in legislation to maintain a navigable channel as far as the tidal wharf at Glasgow Green haven't been adhered to for many years. And that has starved and damaged and stymied the potential of the Clyde from central Glasgow all the way down to the estuary. And I think it does merit a broader inquiry. And I'm not impressed, frankly, with the government's blasé brush-off in its response to this committee and this petition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Sweeney. I actually hesitate to invite colleagues to consider matters at all because I think your knowledge is fairly comprehensive. Do you have any suggestions as to what the committee might itself consider doing?
This has been raised both in the House of Commons and in the Scottish Parliament over the years, but it's not really had any serious focus, and it's been most frustrating. And I think a number of parliamentarians across parties have expressed this concern. So I think that the creation of a space to look at this in greater depth would be fantastic, and I think the Public Petitions Committee serves, a good opportunity to be that space for this wider consideration. So looking at stakeholders up and down the Clyde, I know colleagues have suggested some stakeholder groups, perhaps in the estuary, Firth of Clyde area, but perhaps also looking at submissions from the Greater Glasgow City Region Councils, also looking at perhaps some of the major industrial companies on the Clyde, such as BE Systems, such as Malin Group, who are looking to develop infrastructure on the Clyde, would be helpful, as well as perhaps Ferguson Marine and other parties who have industrial operations on the Clyde. There might also be worth speaking to Maritime UK and other trade bodies that look at port development, to perhaps get some analysis around the longer-term growth of the Clyde as a port relative to other competitor ports in the UK, just to sort of start to establish a bit of a base of evidence as to what is going on. I think it would also be good if Peel Group would respond to some of this. I think it's important that they justify their position and set out their plans for investment and the Clyde. No one's per se against Peel. What we're concerned about is the lack of clear operational ambition for the Clyde as an asset. If they were to rise to that challenge, then I think people would be more relaxed about their stewardship of the river.
Well, I'm very grateful for your experience and passion and obviously range of comprehensive suggestions there. Colleagues, I'm very happy to embrace all the suggestions Mr Sweeney has made. Are there any others colleagues might wish to add? Mr Golden.
I think, first of all, the committee needs to be clear that we're really conflating two separate asks here. One, in relation to what we've heard this morning around the future of the Clyde, and the second part, which I believe is what the petition focuses on, is the change of ownership with regard to the future of the Clyde. And I think we just need to be clear that one doesn't necessarily link to the other, but it could. But our focus really needs to be on the latter point, although I think it would be useful to have a fully informed opinion around the future of the Clyde from interested parties. With that, and particularly with regards to the petition, I think it might be useful to write to the Scottish Government regarding both aspects, future of the Clyde and ownership, and particularly, and I refer to Katie Clark's submission, the former Transport Minister Jenny Gilruth, and I'm reading from it, said she acknowledged that private ownership of harbours can substantially slow progress in relation to improvements. Now, that strikes me, if that is indeed Scottish Government policy, that would lead one to a conclusion that the petition should be warmly welcomed, if that's the case. But I think it's important to clarify that with the Scottish Government, and I think it's worthwhile, in addition to that, writing to the British Ports Association, UK Chamber of Shipping, CMAL, Calmac Ferries, Inverclyde Council, North Ayrshire Council and Glasgow City Council.
Which I think were some of the suggestions, along with others, that Mr Sweeney made. Yes, I mean, I do think that the petition opens up an area about which I myself knew very little, I have to say, and yet, born, raised and lived in and around the city of Glasgow, through which the Clyde is the dominant feature all my life, without really giving any recent thought to the issues that are raised in the petition, or indeed the issues that have been discussed in some detail by Paul Sweeney. And I have, from time to time over the decades, wondered myself about the lack of any transformative. I mean, I used to come home from school when there were still wharf buildings all the way up right into the city centre along the Clyde, and things happening in them, and they were all done away with. And then I think we had river taxis for all of 5 minutes, which didn't really amount to very much. And then I seem to remember there was a flying plane that would go to Oban from somewhere on the river. But compared to other major cities that you visit, where the river is still a teeming lifeline through the city, the Clyde sits rather dormant, really, and apart from city life. And I think some of the issues raised by the petition and by Mr Sweeney might be underpinning some of the lethargy that is associated with all of that. So very happy to take all these issues forward at this stage, and we'll obviously here consider the petition further and decide what we might further want to do when we get the various responses. So thank you very much. That brings